host. And not to go all too crazy, but just in the interest of getting good stuff, useful stuff out about your background. I don't know that I know this. What was your undergraduate major?
You know, I actually majored in child development, and I started out pre-med. Because
I did know that.
I loved all the physics and chemistry, like all those nerdy courses. But I then had an internship at a TV station in Boston. I went to school in Boston. I had I had an internship at a TV station there, and I loved it. And my uncle was in the business, so I would always go visit him. He was doing, when I was younger, the evening news at CBS. So I'd always go visit him. So I always kind of loved it. I was like the kid in high school who would come home and watch the news. You know, so
again, don't apologize.
So yeah, so I was really, really interested. I took an awesome course in school on child development. I loved it. I just was like fascinated by it, the psychology of it all. So that's what I majored in, and I went to Tufts in Boston, which didn't at the time have a very strong media major or department. So I minored in communications. Okay. And that's how I landed in it.
And then, so by the time you were getting out of school, did you know you were going to look for communications jobs?
So when I graduated from school, I actually had an internship the last year of school in Boston. So that internship turned into sort of a freelancing position. Okay. So I lived with my grandparents because I didn't have a secure job. And I continued to work at the TV station until I kind of moved my way up.
And so I don't know if these guys would know it unless they've lived in or around Boston, but say what station that was.
New England Cable News. So it's a regional station. So it was like kind of like the CNN of the region. It wasn't
a little bit New York One, sort
exactly
of,
like
right?
New York One. Totally.
Who still has cable these days?
I know, right?
Yeah, I know. Mostly cord cutters or cord networks, right? Yeah. But if you guys know New York One, if you've seen it, this
like
is sort
local
of
news.
kind of local news. Yeah. In a way, more in depth because at least it's on all the time and it's news all the time.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Through cable. Yeah. And how did you beat me to CNN? How did you get there?
Yeah. So when I was at New England Cable News, I was working with somebody who went on to CNN, and I took over. He was actually producing 2 shows at the time, so I took over his 2 shows, and then he was like, you have to come to New York, you have to come to CNN. And so I applied for a job, and that's how I got to CNN.
And describe the arc of what you did. How many years were you at CNN?
Let's see. So probably like 2007 to 2012.
Yes.
-ish.
Yeah,
so
12 is when I called you.
Yeah, 5 years.
And so describe what that was between New York and Atlanta.
Yeah, so I started as an AP, associate producer, on a show there, and then again just kind of kept moving up. And I was a producer, so doing sort of segments. So if the show is an hour long, there's like a 5 to 10 minute segment that I would be in charge of producing there, and I was on with Mitch Campbell Brown's show. And then, as often happens, the show got canceled. And I found myself with everyone else on my team looking for jobs. And so somebody that I was working with at CNN, a Campbell show, which had sort of morphed along the way into different shows, as they often do also. And she kind of told me about an opportunity in Atlanta. And so at the time in my personal life, I had just gotten engaged. My husband, was in New York, and I was like, well, I'm going to move to Atlanta. There's a job opportunity there. And he's like, but I work in New York, and we just got engaged. And I'm like, no, but it's great. It's a good opportunity. He's like, no, but we just got engaged, and I live in New York, and I can't move.
Can I just add, if you hear that and think, oh, Atlanta's the hinterland. Well, Atlanta's actually, you may know, the home of CNN.
Right.
New York had gotten more activity in the years you were there, but the home was still Atlanta. That was like, and still is, the mothership.
Exactly. So a lot of the sort of like bigger shows at CNN, like the primetime, nighttime stuff, and the morning show are done in New York, but everything else is done in Atlanta. It's like home base. So to go to Atlanta is like a great opportunity because you just get to have more exposure and do more. So long story short, I went, and he stayed up here, and we did lots of flying back and forth. And then I got married, and he was still up here, and I was still down there. But I was only there for probably a little over a year. working on the newsroom shows. So more of like the daytime programming and the weekend programming. And so,
But as such, you were typically overseeing how many blocks of live programming, how many hours of live programming at a time?
so 1 to 2 live programming. So by the time I left Atlanta, I was sort of in charge, I guess, of the show. So I was the one who was in the anchor's ear and overseeing all of the writing and what went into the show, and when there was breaking news, how we covered it and what we did. So that's what I was doing in Atlanta. Then I came back to New York, did a little more evening primetime shows, and then came over to Cohort.
And this is where the story connects to especially what I would like you all to hear today, because I think Liz, as young as she is, actually represents a good example of the bridge between, I think, kind of the old way of doing things and the way things are done now. And Liz actually, in our case, working together, helped to define a lot of the new ways that things are being done, but also where I think things are going to go in the future. Because when I got to CNN, and I was lucky enough to inherit a team that was already together doing Rick's show. It was funny, it was a show that was just meant to be a filler show, 8 o'clock every weeknight, was really getting no attention, no promotion, but was doing very well, getting no credit for it. So there was this small, energetic, creative team doing a really good job, Liz being a key part of it. But one of the things that I observed, and I see now more clearly in retrospect, was Liz was one of several associate producers, and they were really the workhorses of the staff. I mean, the doing everything, but it was still kind of the old world model where people either chose to or were led to specialize, right? Like I remember, I think Richie at that point was more the graphics
That's
AP,
right. Yeah.
and I forget how it fell out, like between you and Ella and a couple others, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that was kind of the old world model where, and you guys now have exposure to this by working on your scripts individually and collaboratively. You know, we've talked about the need these days to be, as a person and as a skilled, you know, creative person, much more of a Swiss Army knife, right? Where you've got to have, you don't have to be the best at everything or the, you know, have everything in the same proportion among your skills, but you have to know at least what the different jobs are. Liz, I think, sort of came up at the tail end of that era of super specialization, where a lot of people just became one thing. You know, they were an anchor producer, or they really were primarily a writer, right? And the reason I bring it up is I've talked a little bit about this thing that came to be called HuffPost Live, which started just as an idea now 5 years ago or whatever it was. This is going to sound pretty basic in the era of Periscope and Meerkat and Facebook Live and soon YouTube Connect, which they're about to launch. But 5 or 6 years ago, the idea of a digital publisher like HuffPost launching a live daily streaming video network seemed crazy, and it was. And it fell to, Liz, I think, was our third hire. It fell to a small group of us starting with 5, eventually becoming about 150, to figure out what it was and how we were going to do it. And Liz was crucial in that, so much so that even though we hired her, this was a good example of, you think you're going to do it the way you've always done things. Like we thought, many of us came from cable news, and we thought we were just going to do cable news on the internet. And luckily, early on, we kept ourselves from making mistakes when and it kept changing. There was no one person who would raise her or his hand and go, wait a minute, let's do it some way different. But happily, Liz turned out to be one of the consistent people and pointing out, why are we just trying, we don't have that much money. And the internet is different. It's a different viewing experience. It's increasingly on different devices. You know, mobile was starting to pick up in terms of the percentage of consumption. And so luckily, we checked ourselves and kept, over time, reminding ourselves, let's not just do that because it's a different thing. And Liz wound up being not only one of our key live producers just to get us on the air, but then about 6 months in, we realized we needed to pivot our staffing and our workflow, because even though the product was called live, most of the consumption was not live. It was we were going to clip our segments and publish them into articles. This was a little bit before so much consumption of video, at least by Facebook and Twitter, but we knew we were going to have to build for that. So Liz wound up being not only one of our senior producers, but I think did we call you eventually head of product? Or, yeah. And, which was new to us because, again, we came out of TV. So the idea of that we had to have a product orientation, let alone a tech one. So Liz became responsible for leading the charge on everything from the consumer-facing site, the actual HuffPost Live, if you went to that page or if you clicked to it from the HuffPost front page. And if you've ever seen it before, part of what was, again, it seems obvious now, but it was new at the time. Our video window was only about a quarter of the screen. And all the other stuff became crucial to the product. Live streaming comments using Facebook and Twitter and the HuffPost commenting system, and having lots of information around and very clickable that led you to engage with the story. So you could, when we would have guests on, they were on by Google Hangout or Skype, and their links were live so that you could see their Twitter feeds or read other information about the article. You could go back there, all the things you can't do on TV. TV is obviously very literal, even with the way CNN does so much graphics on screen to the point of annoyance. Other than read it, you can't really do anything with it, right? Our thing was, let's make it all actionable. So we made it so that you could go back and easily watch old segments. You could watch and engage with what's live. And maybe most crucially, you could engage with what hasn't yet happened. We would be posting segments to come. We would show you in advance who the guests were and what the background information was. So if you wanted to, you could get read in. And equally or more important, you guys, I'm sure, know at this point and probably have used a variety of CMSs, content management systems. Well, we played around with, was there an off-the-shelf solution? Could we get something of the type that we had used at CNN? And all of the existing live TV content management systems had not kept pace with the internet. I mean, it sounds crazy, but it was, we were using stuff that really had not evolved in about 10 years, to the point where it was actually hard to play out YouTube videos in our live broadcasts, as silly as that sounds. They're just, the people who do these didn't have an incentive and didn't really see the internet coming, so they thought live TV news and sports would be the way it always had been. So we wound up, crazily enough, writing our own content management system. And in addition to all the product stuff, Liz had to oversee that, and that was constantly evolving because we were trying to connect producers who came out of live broadcasting and developers who had never done any video. And Liz was at the nexus of all that. A quick story I remember in our first several months as we were staffing up, and I have pictures to prove it, in this little room that we had like made for 10 people. At one point we were 40 people jammed in it, but early on, I got these pictures that almost look like The Last Supper, where Liz is right in the center and she's got all these developers surrounding her, and they're looking and pointing. And if you look at the timeline, it goes from pictures of just sort of confusion to actual smiles over the course of a couple of weeks. But I remember at one point early on, because this had not been done before, Liz is trying to explain to them how and why live TV broadcasting is done. They're trying to explain the needs of developers, right? You know, guys who actually write code. And I felt for a moment like I was a zookeeper who had put different species in a cage together, and I didn't know who was going to eat whom. Yeah. You can talk to this more, but eventually it worked out terrifically, right? Yeah. But what were your impressions of that? Do you remember back those first weeks of like what it felt like? Yeah.
I remember they would laugh at me because they had never put on a live TV broadcast, and we were putting on a live TV broadcast, but we were putting it on the internet, which at the time when I was at CNN, there was a very clear distinction between what went on the air and what went on the site, the website. And the two didn't really talk to each other. It was like the TV portion made their content, they produced their shows, and then it was kind of like an afterthought. Oh yeah, let me give some clips to the website. And the website would then put those clips up and write an article around it. And in reality, the people that should have been writing the articles and picking the video and doing all that were the people who were sort of participating in the show and writing the show. And there was sort of a disconnect. At the Huffington Post, they had a system to get everything on the internet, but they didn't have a system for video to coordinate. You know, when a video is created, there has to be a lot of work that goes into producing that. You know, like who are the guests going to be, and what are we going to talk about, and what visual things are we going to show. And so that kind of needs its own system. So when we got to HuffPost, we sort of realized, well, we need something that's TV and internet. And so we decided to build it. And I just remember talking to the tech guys, the developers, and saying, well, you know, when we write a script in our system, we need it to then appear in the prompter so that the anchor can read it. They're like, what do you mean? You're going to connect these two systems? That's crazy. I'm like, no, it happens. It happens. And so there was definitely sort of a lot of work that I had to do to explain to them that there were some basic things that seemed pretty difficult to do that we actually needed. And so it was challenging at first. And from my perspective, I had no idea what it meant to create one of these things. To me, it was like magic. When I was at a TV station, I would type some stuff in a script, hit enter, and it went to the prompter. Or, you know, there was a way where I entered a line in the rundown, and all of a sudden it had 20 seconds on it, so I could know that the anchor had 20 seconds to read it. So all of these things, I had no idea what went into building it. So it was a learning curve for me. And then by the end, I sort of got a sense of, okay, what I'm asking for is going to be this amount of work. It's going to be a lot of work. And then this other thing that I kind of want is going to be a little bit amount of work. So it's kind of prioritizing what we wanted to get done in order to help the teams.
And that's a good example. And probably 100 times over, we had stuff over the course of 2 or 3 years that became exactly that. In some cases, it was reverse engineering stuff that you and I took for granted, because at a place like CNN, there were just a lot of resources and things were there for us. And we knew we needed them, but we never knew how they came to be. So we had to remake it, but better. In some cases, it was doing things that were entirely new, like you know, TV news until recently was not predicated on actual viewers, regular people being on the TV, right? It was always like this sort of, you know, magical group of experts who had somehow, you know, passed the test that they were allowed to be on TV. So it was revolutionary for us that we said, no, we're going to have, you know, any of us could be in the conversation live with the host anchor, along with experts and really famous people. You know, that was novel. But getting Google Hangout, which was still emerging as a product, to play well, and trying out Skype and a couple others and just seeing what did and didn't work for our purposes. Thank you. So, and it's funny that when we got there, HuffPost at that point was only, I think, 7 years old, right? And had just been acquired by AOL. So it had some decent money behind it. Already had a good track record. I mean, had just won its first Pulitzer. Already had very good traffic numbers, was starting to do well in terms of social referrals. And I say all that because, you know, for us, 7 years doesn't sound that long. But one of the things that we came to realize as this new group within was that 7 years is just long enough for stuff to start to ossify if you're not paying attention. And for a lot of, oh, that's not how we do it here. And that's one of the, I hope the lessons you guys take away is that that's not how we do things here is, I think, one of the greatest dangers that you guys will face in the marketplace. And my strong suggestion is don't buy into it. Keep questioning. Now, equally, there can be a danger if you, as a lot of tech people do productively, go in saying, oh, whatever is done, we're just going to do the opposite of that, right? Because very often there are reasons things are done, but I think you all especially, you know, you've heard me say this, you're coming into the marketplace at the right time with the benefit of this program and your own good creative and business instincts. You guys are the perfect ones. You know, maybe not in your first jobs, but along the way, for you to be propelling the kind of thinking that Liz herself, you know, often initiated or certainly harnessed within our group. For somebody to be able to just ask, like, why do we do it this way? Is it because it's been done this way for 60 years, or because it's actually a good idea or the right way to do things? You know, and so everything from knowing TV, cable TV especially, and then choosing not to do it those ways, or knowing what things we actually needed, like we were still going to have anchors read off prompters. So however it got there mattered less than the fact that we knew we still needed it, right? We didn't want people like reading off of index cards or whatever. But then the notion of plugging a video operation on top of primarily a text one, in the case of HuffPost, right? Now, equally to me, here are some of the challenges. And I want to get in a minute to where Liz is now. But we left HuffPost at different times, but Liz and I would check in periodically, and we realized that, so we had this great period in 2012 and 13 where none of the rules about live streaming video were written yet, and we were lucky enough that we sort of got to write some of the new rules. But once we left, and I'm not saying this is a knock on anybody else, but again, it's scary how fast things get set and people keep doing things a certain way. And I'm very sure if we were building the same product in 2014 and 2016, it would look different each time. And there's only 2 years in each of those increments. So at the point that we were building it in 2012, if you guys remember back, what was around then and what your own behavior patterns were, it wasn't crazy to build a new site or a new site within HuffPost. It wasn't crazy to use the HuffPost commenting platform, which was already very rich and highly used. And it was a little bit crazy to shrink the video window the way we did, but that turned out to be forward-looking. But then in 2014, we would have needed it to be much more, I think, about Facebook and YouTube, and not necessarily our own site. And today it would certainly have to be, I think, at least a mobile product, and maybe even like a Facebook Live, or one. In other words, not at all on HuffPost, a HuffPost product built, or maybe it would be Snapchat, right? I mean, it could be so many different things. And even though this is all about news, I wanted you guys to hear more from Liz about her experience, because I think that all this stuff is going to come into play in scripted as well, and you guys at least have to pay attention and at best will hopefully be some of the people propelling this, right? So to cut to the chase, what are you doing today?
Yeah, and I just want to say, one thing that I thought was really helpful as I sort of went through my career was I sort of knew what broadcast news was at CNN, but I also knew kind of what wasn't working. So it was very helpful for me to sort of know what the mold is, to know kind of where to break the mold, if that makes sense. To sort of know, okay, you know what? We used to gather our information. We had a system, and the AP, Associated Press, would shoot us alerts that would tell us when breaking news would happen. And there was a time at which Twitter became that, where I remember there was a turning point where there was an earthquake up here, I think in 2012 or something. And it was the first time that Twitter told us about the earthquake down in Atlanta before the AP and the Geological Survey told us. So people on the ground sort of alerted us to this breaking news before the people that would have told us a year ago, basically.
Right. By the way, you're right, that was the year, or 2011, because I was in my office at the Onion in Soho, and we were reading tweets from people in DC as we were feeling it.
Right, because it was kind of coming up. Yeah. So before it kind of got officially confirmed, everyone was, and that's just one small example, but to sort of know, okay, this is changing, and to just kind of know how the mold is being broken was really helpful for me.
In terms of using Twitter as a source, are there rules about credibility? Are you allowed to report on that kind of thing, if they report that thing on Twitter, or do you have to wait for confirmation? Or
so it kind of depends, and it kind of depends where you are and what organization. So where I was at CNN, it happened to have happened, I want to say 10 minutes before the show that I was producing went on the air. So for us, it served as sort of an alert. And then by the time we went on the air, it was confirmed. So basically it helped us prepare for the point at which it would be confirmed. So I could say, okay, you know what? We were going to start the show with this, but now we're going to start with it. We felt pretty confident that what was being said on Twitter was accurate. And then literally a minute before we went on air, it was confirmed. So we were already kind of set up. We had people on the phone ready to go. We were starting to get in pictures. So it helped us as a gathering tool, not necessarily as something that we use to.
Right. Although even that is changing. I mean, it's a great question, because as you guys know, the standards for who's considered credible, sort of keep changing. And even, if you happen to see it over the weekend, in the midst of the 1,000 think pieces written about Prince, a couple that I saw have been about the news reporting of his death and the speculation about the cause of death, where the first place to report it was TMZ, right? And I don't know if you read The Wrap, which has grown as an entertainment trade. Sharon Wax went out of LA. one of her editors had, I thought, a very good piece about basically when are we going to give TMZ the credit it deserves? Because it's sort of like the National Enquirer years ago. Purists dismiss them as being a gossip rag. But whether you like their methods or not, including how many people they pay off, they're, I don't want to say a legitimate news organization, but they're approaching it, right? In that, you have to give them credit because they're right more often than not, and they're right usually faster than others, right? And so, but you saw the same dance with a lot of the so-called legitimate or old school kind of organizations, you know, waiting for confirmation. In this case, I think it came from the AP about 17 minutes later or something, right? But it still begs the question, you know, they were the first to speculate about the cause of death. They will probably in 2 weeks or 2 months or whenever the autopsy results are released, they'll probably have them first. They will probably be right, you know? So the marker is always moving, but it's a great question because, you know, you'd be crazy these days not to say at least, hey, we're seeing all this activity on Twitter, you know? And a lot of really good reporters, and by the way, this is something that came into play for us when we were hiring colleagues as we started to staff up what became HuffPost Live. You know, we realized that and I don't know if you ran into this at school or at all, when if Twitter was already a thing by the time you were in your journalism program and it had not launched yet. It's very interesting to see the way it's evolved because, you know, the founders will tell you they never invented it to be a news source or a customer service platform. I mean, it's users who have figured out what Twitter has become and is becoming. But when we were hiring colleagues and we figured out, again, that our producers had to be really nimble and skilled across a lot of skill sets and, you know, one of the filters for hiring became, you know, we'd ask everybody who wanted a job as a producer, oh, so tell us about, you know, your activities in social media, and everybody would go, oh, I'm on Facebook and Twitter all the time. And, you know, if you dug a little bit deeper, they'd be just doing what everybody else does, right? But the ones who we realized were for us were the small minority, and we wound up hiring them, who saw Twitter as an entirely new tool. And, you know, I used to say they played offense rather than defense. You know, they could go deeper on Twitter. They could figure out what was real, what was verifiable, how to get in touch. You know, early on when no one knew like the game of DMing, they could figure out ways to DM with people who turned out to be news sources. You know, one of the most amazing one was, you remember we hired a couple people from Al Jazeera, Liz and Dina and Ahmed, and they had all been involved with or sort of one step removed. If you guys have read the story about how the Bin Laden raid was reported, do you guys know this? The first news of the raid came about because a guy who lived in the town where it happened started tweeting about the noise and the helicopters. And it was, I think it was before there was an Al Jazeera America, I think it was Al Jazeera English, that tracked down the guy by virtue of his Twitter handle and convinced him to give a phone interview. But again, that was early in the days of Twitter when sort of nobody knew, how do you reach out to a source and get him to answer you, let alone come on your news show? Nobody in the world figured it out except for this small team of young producers at Al Jazeera, of all places. And so that kind of set the standard for us of like how you should use all these. And now obviously it's much more magnified with Instagram and Snapchat, and you know, all the messaging platforms have become crucial. So Rebecca, it's a good question, actually many times over, that is going to get only more complicated.
Yeah.
You know? So Liz, tell everybody what you're doing now and why.
Yeah, so I started to love what I was doing at HuffPost. So even though I had always been sort of in editorial, I loved the control room, I loved putting shows together, I really started enjoying sort of being that liaison between the editorial team and the developers who were sort of coding this platform. It kind of like hit all of my interests and skill sets. And so I had an opportunity to go, actually one of the developers I worked with at HuffPost went to this startup company and they were looking for a product manager. And so it sort of seemed like the best opportunity for me to see, okay, someone will actually hire me for this new job. I mean, when I was an intern at the local station in Boston, I was like out in the field. Maybe I want to be a reporter. I was, you know, editing videos. I kind of touched on everything. And so to come now to a place where I'm actually not even really in news is just kind of weird to me.
Or in media.
In
media,
right?
I mean,
yeah.
Say what the product is.
So the startup is called Imprint, and it's basically like you want to give your, you know, your mother a 50th, 60th birthday present and you don't know what to get her. She has everything. Like, how do you convey how much she means to you? You basically go to our site and you send out emails, Facebook messages to all her friends, your family, and you ask them to contribute messages for her. And so you can, people can add their video messages, just, you know, text, they can put photos, and it sort of aggregates this wonderful, you know, like.
You would use the word scrapbook with me. Do you guys not say that anymore?
Scrapbook, it's like a gift. And it really has become so powerful for the people receiving it. And so we're still in beta. We're still like building everything. We just, a couple weeks ago, finished the mobile portion of it. So we kind of feel like we're now getting at a place where people are using it, but we're getting at a place now where we really want to kind of spread the word about it. And I've been kind of trying to use Twitter a little bit because I feel like if I was to go back and describe what Twitter is, it's kind of hard to articulate what it is. It's the same kind of way with imprint. You kind of have to know it and use it and be with it to kind of really understand what it is. So for now, I'm kind of trying to do my best to describe it.
By the way, can I just ask you, how do you deliver the product to the recipient? What does he or she get?
So for now, it's a link. Yeah.
It's a link.
Coming soon.
Right.
It's a link. Yeah.
So it lives on your servers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And so now we're toying with, I mean, people have asked for a downloadable version or they want a book of it.
Right.
And so it's been interesting. Part of my job is I'm sort of taking all of the analytics, the numbers, how people are using our tool, and I'm taking kind of the customer feedback, what they're telling us they want. And I'm trying to put it all together and say, okay, what do we do next? And one of the things that people keep asking for is like a printed version of it. But when people tell you they want it printed, they don't really articulate exactly what they mean by that. And so for a while, we thought they just kind of wanted cards of each message, you know, kind of put together. And then we started kind of doing this user testing, asking people, would you want these cards? And everyone's like, no, I don't want cards. I want a book. Like, I want a book that I can put on my table or that I can open up. And part of it is taking into account what people want now and how many people who are using our site aren't very technically savvy versus like how many people who are younger will use it and what they will want, you know, like maybe these people who can't use a computer want the book because that's what they're used to, but maybe the people who are sort of the next generation that will use this product don't care and they just want to sort of send it in an email or have it on their computer forever. So it's kind of that fine line that we're sort of, you know, dealing with is like what people say they want, who these people are, what we give them. So it's kind of been my job to help navigate all of that and decide, okay, what's next?
And I bet you guys, I'm sure, can see the connection to a television program, right? Where those similar issues of trying to intuit what people want and sort of give them whatever it is, information, entertainment, thrills, laughs, whatever, before they even know they want it, or addressing a need that they don't even know they have, right? Which you can only sort of confirm in retrospect, right? Back to you, question.
I was just curious about the process that you guys went through in developing the mobile application, like how that was developed and whatever. Yeah,
so we have what's called like a UX designer. So UX stands for user experience. So their job is literally to think about like, okay, I'm a user, I'm gonna get ready to use this product on my phone, like what should it do? So part of it is a guessing game because it doesn't exist. Part of it is sort of mirroring what we've created on the desktop. So we know that this is how it works on desktop. Let's make it as similar as we can. But at the same time, knowing that kind of like different people who use our product will be using mobile versus desktop. For example, when you create an imprint, somebody like what we call the champion, right? I'm the champion. So I'm going to create it for my mom and I'm going to send out all these emails and these messages to people asking them to contribute. So I'm kind of like the owner of it. Primarily, those people are doing it on the desktop. They're kind of like sitting down. It's a very thoughtful process. The people who are contributing are getting an email saying, hey, send a message to my mom. And they're on their phone. And so they click on that email and you want them to be able to easily contribute on the phone. For the most part, people's photos are on their phone, you know? So if you're going to send a photo to my mom, you want to do it on your phone. So part of it is sort of like there's a little bit of psychology in it, right? And then there's also, because we don't have a lot of numbers to go on because it doesn't exist yet on mobile, right? So, we can tell how many people are clicking on the email from a phone, for example, and then getting to the place and being like, I don't go anywhere. So it's kind of half understanding what we think people will want and how they'll use it, and then building it to match, and then starting to kind of test and see. And so that's where we are. A lot of it is like us internally going through and saying, okay, if I'm a real person who's participating in this, I'm gonna do this first, and then this. Oh wait, when I got here, that was a really weird experience. Like I really didn't expect that. So it's kind of like what's intuitive too.
Do you find that advertising for a mobile product is different than advertising for something that isn't specifically on your phone?
So
putting the word out?
we haven't gotten to advertising yet on our, we haven't done any kind of advertising. So I don't have enough experience with that to sort of speak intelligently on it.
Do you have a guess now what the revenue model will be? Will the champions subscribe? Will the family pay for it? Do you think it will be ad supported?
So what we're thinking right now is the way that we will likely make money is that we'll sort of have kind of upgrades. So anyone could use the basic product and you could send it to your mom, but maybe you want to have the link that you send her be like, you're the best mom, whatever the imprint data / you're the best mom, and people would pay for that. Or maybe they'll pay for sort of special messages. Like right now you can add a video, a photo, or a text. Maybe they'll pay for something that's more unique. Finding that the front page of the New York Times from the day she was born and putting that in. Maybe that's something that people would sort of pay for. So we're kind of experimenting with that for now. But again, it's very young, and we're learning a lot that we didn't really realize when we first started. For example, we kind of thought of this as primarily a group gift, everyone coming together and celebrating one person. And we're finding that people are actually using the tool for as like a one-to-one gift, almost like a greeting card, an online greeting card, where maybe I'll just send it to you just because, or because, you had a rough day. And so we're seeing people use it that way. And so we're trying to kind of embrace how people have decided that it should be used versus what we think. And so we're kind of like experimenting with that.
And I think that's really important. I think it goes back to even what I was saying about HuffPost. In a way, if you consider a product like Liz's, which is still in beta, but whether it's an app or a product or a channel or a show, in some ways, to me, they're all very related. And similarly, that ability to say, well, wait a minute, we invented it to be one thing, but our users, even in this early stage, are starting to tell us they want to use it differently. Yeah. Now, you can then sort of put a stake in the ground and go, no, our idea is the better one. We're going to stay what we were. Or you can say, okay, fine, we'll roll with it, and cool, we didn't pick at that, but, right? And maybe versions in between, And I'm thinking back as you're describing it, Liz, remembering, so 6 months into HuffPost, when we asked Liz, when we knew we needed to pivot everything, our product, our workflow, the output, put more to video on demand as opposed to live, it was a huge deal that we asked Liz to move over, and we created this position. And you guys met Josanne early in class, who at the time was Liz's direct boss. And I remember Josanne and I saying to Liz, luckily you were into it and you wanted to do it. And we didn't know where we were going, but we had a sense that it was going to be great for you and that we knew the unit needed it. But I think very early on I said to you, Liz, this isn't just a job. I have a feeling we're remaking your career, right? And so when Liz told me a couple of months ago that she was going to this new company, I finally had a chance to say, see, that's right. I didn't know what it was going to be. And I don't say this lightly. I think also, I think Liz's career prospects have been hugely enhanced because, to be very honest, many, if not most of our colleagues who have just done TV news through the years, even the really, the most experienced, the most talented among them, a lot of them are struggling. As you're seeing, the economy's changed, the methods change, the buyers change. And so, you now have skills specifically as a product manager that, as you've proved, port over to a non-media company. And again, that's one of the things that I wanted to stress for you all, that I don't mean to make your shows or your projects or scripts sound any less creative, but again, since this is a business class and this is a very practical program that you guys are in, the idea, you probably wouldn't think of yourselves as producers or as showrunners, as product managers, but now that I've seen Liz do it, I think you are. And I would suggest that you embrace that and come to understand a couple of things. First of all, not to pat ourselves on the back, but to realize like all we did was reinvent the wheel. So we were so proud of ourselves when we asked Liz to do this new thing, because again, in the realm of TV production, that didn't exist. And it was only a couple of months that we were into it that we realized, oh, all we've done is reinvent this job called product manager that has existed in tech and in the world out there for years and years and years, right? So, but in our case, it was really making it kind of work for us and understand that we have landed on it for the right reasons. But you know, the other thing is, if you take all the elements of what we've talked about through this class, the idea of, you know, understanding where your money to make stuff is going to come from and what the business model is of the people who are going to give you money, whether it's about advertising or about subscription or about licensing or about, you know, games and products that are going to be, you know, come off of your creations. Understanding these distribution platforms, understanding consumer behavior, understanding what devices people are going to watch your stuff on, you know. Not to sound too reductionist about it, but your shows, I would argue, are products, you know. And the more you guys sort of get okay with that and embrace it and understand what it means in terms of moving the pieces. You know, one of the articles I think we had a couple of weeks ago was basically how tech is eating media. And I think it's probably happened already, which is why I thought it was interesting for you to convey. Like, even as you look at it now, if you think about the differences and the parallels between putting on a live show every morning for a couple hours and managing the process by which a new product comes to market, what strikes you as being similar or different?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of organization that goes into all of it. When you're putting a show together, I mean, you have, let's say, an hour and, you know, 12 to 18 minutes of that are commercials. You really have to sort of structure it. You have to make sure it all times out properly. I find like what I'm doing now is we want to do all of these things. We have this new product and we can't do everything at once. We have to sort of decide, okay, what are we going to do first? What are we going to do next? What's most important? Kind of where you used to sort of like front load a show, you know, you'd put the breaking news, the most important story at the top, and then kind of everything sort of trickles down. It's sort of a similar thing with product management. Like, what is the most important thing that we have to get done first, but also sort of seeing like, how do we structure everything so that we can get this product to a place where we feel like people can use it in the right way?
Liz, so does it fall to you then to basically prioritize everybody else's time and what they're working on and in what order and all that?
Yeah. So I'm working with the founders and the CEO, and we're kind of working closely together. I think because it's a new product, we're very much working closely. But yeah, so then it kind of trickles down to, okay, let's say we want to, you know, we know we need to finish that mobile. So we need the designs for that. We need the UX people to start get working on it, but they need to do it ahead of time so that once the developers are ready to code it, they have what they're going to build.
Does anyone here know how to code, or has anyone here done coding? Okay. What languages do you?
I took a bunch of C++ classes when I was in high school, and so it's just rudimentary.
Yeah, but at least you know something about the process. I'll tell you why I ask. I came to know sort of just enough to be dangerous. Liz knows way more. But can you describe, even just like in the early days of HuffPost and then as it applies now, what sprints look like and how you know, stack stories and sort of the day-to-day workflow with you, if you will, that you're managing of the developers and their time and output?
Yeah. So, and I'm even kind of learning that there's different ways to do it all. Like, I'm kind of learning as I go and working with the developers to see what works with this specific team that we have. But what we did at HuffPost was we had what we called 1 week sprint. And so I, as sort of the head of product, I had a vision and I had a roadmap, and I went over it with all of the right people to know, okay, what do we want to get done this year, let's say, or the next 3 months? And then it kind of has to get broken down week by week. And so from a practical standpoint, what we did was on a Thursday, I would meet with all of the developers and I'd say, okay, you know what? starting Tuesday, these are the things that we would really like you guys to build for us. And I would kind of come just as a regular person and say, I need it to do this. And I would just specifically say, it has to operate like this for the editorial team to use it properly. And they would sort of look at it, and knowing what we already had built, they would say, okay, you know what, that's probably going to take 3 people 2 weeks. And so I would kind of break it down and make sure I was very explicit about exactly what I needed it to do. So that come Tuesday, everything was sort of neatly packaged. Let's say we had 5 developers and 10 stories is what we call them. So each developer could do 2 stories, or maybe one developer could do 3 and another one could do 1 big one. And
And by the way, explain what, because it took me a while to learn this.
Story.
The way it's
Sorry.
used is not what we would all expect.
Sorry, yeah. So a story is basically like, okay, when I log on to your website and I click on this button, I needed to do this. And so I, as the product manager, will say, I literally will outline, okay, when a developer is making it, when I click on this button, it should pull up this modal. In that modal, it should have 3 fields. When the person enters those 3 fields and clicks go, this will happen. And so I really explicitly say exactly what I need it to do. And that's sort of a story. That's like one sort of thing that they have to do. And so I'll create however many stories that I want to get done that week. And then they start coding, and I work to move on to the next week. And that's sort of weekly sprints. That's one way to do it. You can also do it where there's 2-week sprints. And so you put enough work in there for the developers for 2 weeks. And then there's what's called kind of Kanban or Kanban. I don't know how everyone pronounces it differently, but it's a little bit more free flow, where there isn't a specific set amount of stories in 1 week. There's kind of just always stories that you need to get to, and the developers just kind of take what they want when they want it to. With the hope that eventually you'll kind of get to where you want at the end of the month, in the same way that if it was more structured. And so different teams work differently. And so I came from a place where we were very structured,
Right.
And we're going a little bit less structured now and kind of experimenting with that. But that's sort of the weekly process.
How does like the experiment process like affect the business model and like your projections for like where you want to be at certain times, especially like when you like have a startup where it's brand new kind of ideas that you're creating?
Yeah, I mean, so we're lucky enough, we have investors right now. So we have like a little bit of wiggle room in terms of when we need to be profitable.
Yeah.
And so what we're doing is we're trying to kind of finish everything right now.
How long have you been doing this?
So I started in December.
Okay.
And the company probably really started a year and a half ago.
Okay.
And so we literally just kind of finished mobile, and now we're at a place where we're still kind of what we think is like finishing everything, whatever that means to us, right? Like, so that we feel like if you come in, you have a good experience and you can get done what you want, going from the very beginning to the very end. And then what we're doing is sort of setting ourselves up so that probably in the fall, winter, we'll be in a place where we can feel like, okay, let's start adding monetization. Let's start adding places within the site for people to pay. We've talked about a pay what you want model, where people would, based on their experience, sort of give whatever money they think is appropriate. I mean, we're at the point where we're kind of like batting around a lot of different business models.
By the way, on that front, what you'll charge for it, what other sites and real world, like as soon as you said that, I thought, oh, like a museum donation, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, so what are you looking to
Yeah.
as your models, just for even what to try out?
Yeah, I mean, there aren't a lot of things like this product. That's the thing.
No, I'm sorry, from a pricing standpoint. Like you're
Oh.
looking at newspapers or museums, or that notion of pay as you go or pay what you like,
Right.
real world or app or not. What do you look at as models that you find might port over well for your product?
To be very, very honest, we've thrown it out there as just like, let's try it. We kind of feel like this gift, it's like a gift, you know? And it sort of goes with the feeling of the product, which is like, let me give what I can, or how good was my experience. We haven't done a lot yet in sort of testing it. This is kind of, we're in the second quarter of the year now.
Right.
This is kind of like where I have to step in and say, okay, what exactly are we going to do? What's going to help us with the business model? Because we still are so early,
right.
And just seeing what would work. We have started what we call a sort of concierge program, where we will offer people, if they want sort of extra help to create it, they can pay $99. And so we're hoping, in working with customers very closely like that, we can see what things they would be willing to pay, and how much they would be willing to pay. It's sort of kind of our entrance into just like experimenting with real people, in addition to sort of taking other structured models. So I think we're kind of in that place now where monetization is next. So we're kind of in the research.
And again, I think that to me is another example. I think you all are going to be in the thick of this. You know, we've been talking obviously a lot about both our own collective viewing tastes changing, or where we're consuming and what we're used to paying for, and what subscriptions we're dropping versus keeping versus sort of doubling down on. And I think in the grand spectrum of, you know, if you're doing a show for Netflix or Amazon and that's part of the monthly subscription or yearly subscription that consumers are paying, all the way over to Bree's model of you're making a web series and using an existing platform to raise money against it. I think what you guys are describing is somewhere on that spectrum. And I think, you know, look, we're now, it's going to sound obvious because it's really basically been, you know, most of your adult lives, but we're 20 years or so into newspapers trying to figure out paywalls and how to manage their digital businesses. And nobody has it nailed. There is no one way that clearly works. They still haven't managed the transition away from paper as part of their product. They still haven't managed the transition away from newsstand and home delivery, you know, even if they've seen their digital business grow. And you would think that is crucial to their future, right? The idea, and now they're going to Facebook, where people are not paying. They're publishing on Facebook. People aren't paying for their content anyway. You know, we're still seeing just all these attempts, and they're necessary, right? Just as you guys are going through it. So why not try them?
Yeah, we're trying to be open to everything and sort of see just the way we're open to the way people are using the app. I mean, a person who's part of a big group who might pay us to help them is not the same person who's going to pay to get help for a card for somebody, for example. So there's all these different sort of use cases, and we just need to be flexible.
Liz, did you guys, at any point, did the discussion go to, well, let's not be a freestanding thing. Let's just do this as a Facebook app, for instance, or do it on one existing platform?
We haven't really, not that I've been a part of. So I've been there for a few months. So there's probably been conversations that I haven't yet been privy to or haven't brought up to speed on. But it's interesting. It's kind of a product that may work with sort of a paperless post type of app, where you're having a party for somebody already. And then as part of that party, you want everyone you're inviting to contribute to this gift by sending a message or a video, whatever. So in that way, potentially there's a partnership, and this is kind of a product that works with it. We've also seen that on Facebook, there are like certain holidays that just seem to be very Facebook holidays. Like there's a Friendship Day that gets a lot of traction on Facebook. And when that kind of thing happens, people are really excited to make gifts for their friends online.
Or what was it, 2 weeks ago was Sibling Day? And
Exactly. Yeah. And so sort of like, it's been interesting to see how these online holidays, and it kind of gets to that question that we have of, do people really want these tangible goods, or do they really want to just be able to celebrate somebody in the moment? When Facebook tells them it's the moment, you know, or
we
whatever.
laugh, but I'm realizing so many of our holidays were invented 100 years ago by the greeting card companies
the Hallmark
anyway.
Company, exactly.
Right? So why not?
This is like
Facebook
the new
now
Hallmark. Exactly. So
it makes perfect sense.
My sole purpose in life is to end Jackie Laws.
So you never get another one of those damn emails.
Those treacly.
Exactly.
Greeting cards.
Right. But Liz, I get it. So you guys are also thinking of yourselves not as just that product, but as something that is almost in the value chain of event-driven stuff, as you say, whether it's paperless. Because I'm thinking, and I guess it was probably a fairly short-lived period, but that stretch where you'd be at a wedding before everybody had their phone with them, and on the
Right.
table you'd find all the disposable cameras, and
Right.
people were asking, just take pictures and then
Yep.
we'll gather them up and do something with them.
Exactly,
Right.
yeah. So we're still in that phase where we're trying to figure out, oh wait, so that's kind of a different thing, right? So that we've kind of had this group get ready for your mom's birthday gift. We have this kind of one-on-one in the moment gift, and then we have this kind of real-time gift where maybe you're at the wedding and you're contributing
Right.
to this.
Right.
And then at the end of the wedding, you have this wonderful sort of scrapbook of
Right.
the actual wedding.
Right.
And then we've also even toyed with sort of giving people a place to honor Prince. So Prince, dies, and maybe there's something where everyone can contribute and use Imprint as a place to send photos or videos
Right.
or messages
Right.
as a more public means. So
Mhm.
we're kind of at the point where we haven't quite figured out our monetization strategy because we're still sort of figuring out our actual
Mhm.
platform
Right.
and what we do.
Right. Right.
So
One thing I wanted to raise also is, in thinking about all the stuff that Liz did, especially at HuffPost, and that I'm hearing come into play now with Imprint. So as I was mentioning, Liz wound up being responsible both for our viewer-facing product, the way people actually watched HuffPost Live, but also this new content management system that we wrote. And we didn't know how crazy we were being in even setting out to do this thing ourselves, because we realized once we got into it, we were both writing a new content management system for video, which was its own craziness, but it was also the publishing platform for this new site. And so to jam those together, either one was nuts, and then to put it together was even crazier. And in the case of the video, the live workflow, again, we were trying to do a better version of something that existed, iNews, for 20 years or something, a big, well-funded company that was just lumbering and hadn't kept pace with the times, right? But I bring it up because I think, in addition to how talented Liz is as a producer, it was crucial that you're in going back to that workflow you were describing of what you were asking of the developers. In the next sprint, the next week, I need Dashboard to now do these things, right? Because you were very much of the group of whatever we were, 60 or so producers in a couple of different cities who just needed this functionality, right? They needed the prompter to work, or they needed, research links to be available the way we wanted, or whatever. And so, in retrospect, it seemed crucial that you weren't other. You had lived the job you were doing now for these internal customers.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
So, again, it's hard to cite an example right now, but I think you guys, as you join other people's shows and eventually sell and run your own shows, you're going to run into this too. You're going to run into, like, I'm struck by, I've told you my brother does these big budget pilots. And, like right now he's finishing one, about to deliver it. And when I talk to him about the workflow, there are things that are way up to speed. And, he, for instance, his daughter's very young, so he's really conscious about like not being away from her during the weekend, and happily now a lot of his cuts he can see online, virtually with his editor, and they don't have to be together. That's a vast improvement, right? And on the other hand, there are aspects about just the day-to-day communication. It is astonishing for people who you'd like to think are on the cutting edge of media. And, for the most part in Hollywood, they've still never heard of Slack and would have no idea how to use it. They don't know to set up a business as sort of a pop-up operation and get everybody the same email, and just have it only live for 2 months. They're still like, you look at the way they generate their staff and crew lists is, near as I can tell, the same way they did so 20 years ago, right? And so, but I think you guys will be much more, in a productive way, the agitators of like, come on, why does it have to be this way? And sometimes you'll see opportunities to just grab a hold of it and not even ask, and just do it a different way. Because if you had to ask, you'd have to convince somebody who's higher up and 15 years older than you and way ingrained in the way of doing things, and explain to them, like, what is this thing called Slack that, that newsrooms are using and companies across the world are using, or whatever it happens to be. We could do an entire operation probably at this point on one of the messaging platforms. Most people of us older than a certain age would have no idea what it is, let alone how to use it.
Yeah.
Right. So are there things already in your short time there that similarly you're you're already redoing or introducing new elements just to the workflow
The workflow
of imprint, of how you guys are getting your stuff done?
Getting it done or getting the website
Both.
changing?
Both.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we're listening to people who are using it, right?
Mhm.
Which I think is key.
Which is now about how many people?
That's a really good question. I mean,
Rough guess.
there's probably like at a given time, we probably have like 20,000 users like in a month, right? So
Mhm.
it's not a big number.
And do people tend to use it just once, or are they now coming back for multiple uses?
It's a wonderful question. It's something I'm trying to get to the bottom of, sort of capturing that.
Right.
A big part of my job is sort of trying to figure out how to track people in the right way, and taking sort of when they take actions on our website, that's getting sort of logged back to us. Whether it's through their email or a cookie that they have that says this person has created an imprint and hey, red flag, they've created one in the past or they've participated one in the past. And it's not that simple to do. So we have to sort of code, I have to get the developers, and it's a high priority of mine to sort of code when we know that somebody's coming back, because that's sort of a key metric. If there's sort of this viral product where people are coming back once they use it, that's great for us to know from a business standpoint.
I have a specific problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's with this program.
Yeah.
Okay.
I am mired in a traditional way of recruiting,
Yeah.
which is that I get on planes and go to places
Yeah.
and talk to people.
Yeah.
And I like it, but I wish I didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
And is this just branding, or when you said are they coming back? I clicked onto the website for writers, SSN something, and then this thing came up, and it said a low residency program in Vermont, and you just stay. They do it over the internet,
Right.
writing wherever you are.
Yeah.
And twice a year, you come to beautiful Montpelier,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it seemed to me like that was a diploma,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
but we're very specific. I just want people to know about us, and do I have to go out and hire a branding company?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, right? I mean, and something we learned at the Huffington Post too is like, a lot of people spend time worried about the homepage, HuffingtonPost.com, that homepage, and now people aren't really going to the homepage anymore. They're going to specific articles that they see in feeds, and so they're taking that article and they're going to it. Maybe once they're there, they're sort of clicking around, and so there's this sort of shift in how, like, you would think of a product from a branding perspective, and what you sort of would focus on.
So I do have a couple of thoughts on that, and I think it's great that you're asking, and I'd love to know what you guys think. I think it can start from a couple of levels. One is knowing the relatively young age of the people who can make up the cohorts to come, right? Try to figure out, obviously, what's the likeliest ways to reach them. We know it's not newspaper advertising, right? So think about that audience, where they are. I think it's really good to start with a need on your end, like, I just don't want to travel that much. So, and I would call that productively selfish, right? In the sense of, that is something about the business resource of yours, and to go from that to, so if we imagine a different process whereby you don't have to be on the road as much, or when you are, it's because you're choosing to do so. So for me, everything from how do you, we learn so much about the value of community at a place like HuffPost. So for starters, how do you activate your existing community, which means this group and every cohort that came before, and have them be proselytizers of a sort. Now I see you guys do it a little bit. There are email lists, there are Facebook groups, that's great. But if you made a concerted effort to say, it's almost like now a product is going to be recruiting for this program, right? How does that come to life? Some of it is more than just, let's rely on the randomness or email lists or whatever. Some of it is also just kind of the the blocking and tackling of, and I don't think you would need a marketing expert necessarily, but good old-fashioned search engine optimization, right? So basically, buy your way. It's not terribly expensive to when people are searching for, and you guys could be hugely helpful in this. What are the likeliest terms that the use of 2 and 3 years out would be using? How did you guys find this? Is it about graduate programs in TV writing? Is it about something around the word showrunner? Is it about practicum or practical? All those things that you guys could envision, and basically start to buy up those terms so that, I don't know what the competition is.
Well, I had a discussion the other day, and it's big and limiting, because people still want to be screenwriters.
Right.
I think that the careers are in television, so that's why we said TV. Why limit it?
Yes.
Good
point.
I think you're missing a part of the audience, so
Yeah.
we'll change the name maybe to LIU Screenwriting Writers, Screenwriting Studio, rather than TV Writers Studio.
You know what? I think that makes a lot of sense on every level, including that screen is still a really powerful word, and it's only become more expansive because screen is everything now from IMAX down to the smallest phone.
Exactly.
Right? And so even though right now everybody, Benson, you're the outlier by not even being in the program. Samantha's the outlier by wanting to be a feature writer, but everybody else is going to be a TV writer, right? Yeah. Well, you're right. Going forward, the idea that maybe a cohort would have an even greater mix of maybe a couple screenwriters, maybe a couple people who are creative.
No, but I think you've expanded the whole, the entire definition here, because with stuff like this, if you can just get in the door anywhere as a writer, as a creator, I think what you've expanded this to is the audio platforms, all of these things that we came in here thinking very narrowly about. I want to be a showrunner. I want to have a show on television. Well, why wouldn't you want to be working?
Yeah, and
for CNN?
I agree exactly. And look at the way CNN. I wasn't kidding earlier when I said it's all storytelling. You've got CNN getting in a big way into the documentary business in prime time. Now, expanding the definition of documentary. We've talked about shows like everything from Making a Murderer to The Jinx or whatever that are they're based on real stories, but they're scripted, or they're doing recreations, not as a full-on drama like OJ, but it's part of Jinx or whatever it happens to be. And Norman, in the same way that you, from the beginning of the cohorts, challenged that old hierarchy of somehow movies are supposed to be better or more sought after. Well, we all know TV's actually been, I would argue, better creatively for quite some time now. I'm going to guess people younger than you are probably going to think that too, just because it's so much richer, and unless they want to write for Marvel and DC, there's just not as much room in the feature space. But another thing, Norman, to your point, is that to take Bree's model and say, if that's what you love and it's creatively fulfilling, and crucially that there's a business model around it, that can be the be all and end all. That it doesn't have to be, as it is now, just a stepping stone to, well, I'm going to parlay that to eventually have my HBO or Netflix series. That maybe for you or others, a web series will turn out to be the most creatively fulfilling and hopefully, if not filthy rich making, at least enough that there is a sustaining business model. That's why I'm so intrigued with you guys even playing around with I don't know that anyone has yet done. They've done it obviously on Indiegogo and Kickstarter, where it's a suggested contribution, but it's not yet literally I didn't have anything to do with the making of it, but to consume the episode, I can now pay something of my choosing.
Well,
Right.
Patreon, Patreon has that whole platform of
Exactly.
continuous donations.
Exactly.
Part of the incentivizing for Indiegogo and Kickstarter, though, is if the people don't meet whatever goal that they need to meet, the thing doesn't happen.
Right.
And that incentivizes people to pay slightly more, I think.
Right.
But Patreon is the thing that's being done. The thing is being made no matter what, and sort of Patreon
Good
people
point.
contribute whatever they can, and they get sort of weird perks alongside of it. So
Mhm.
like I feel like Patreon's
Right.
much closer, like
Yep.
for pay what you can.
But
Exactly.
exactly, I agree with you. I think that is a good model. But as we talked about, we're also in this funny phase where we keep seeing sort of unbundling, but then rebundling. So we're all rightly pissed off that we've been paying too much for cable, or most of you have never had it. But so you're seeing people drop the subscription partly or entirely and going, well, my new version is I'm going to have Amazon and Netflix and Hulu, or whatever it happens to be. And you guys saw last week, Amazon finally unbundled Amazon Video from Amazon Prime, right? So if you don't want Prime, you can now get just video, and not surprisingly, it's $1 or $2 cheaper than Netflix, right? So they're clearly, and I would argue that kind of competition is healthy, right? But then I also wonder, okay, so let's say on Amazon, I was looking forward to the second season of Catastrophe, right? 6 episodes coming, right? Well, is there a model where I'm not paying the full Amazon? If that's the thing that matters to me most, or more than any other thing on Amazon, is there the model where I'm paying something just to get the new season of Catastrophe? Or I'm making a suggested contribution?
Exactly.
Or it's a little bit, we're used to already iTunes of we'll buy it after the fact if we like iTunes as our platform and we feel the pricing is good. Is it worth it to buy a whole season? Do I just want to buy a couple episodes?
It's the same, like, if you think of all of the different platforms that HBO has, like HBO On Demand, HBO Live, HBO Now,
Yes.
HBO, just regular HBO,
Yeah.
just
Right.
like all the different things that you can do.
Classic
for,
HBO.
Yeah, for just what you want your HBO experience to be.
Right. Right.
So, like, we're in the process of doing this right now. I'm going to cancel our cable subscription today because Game of Thrones from yesterday, so I don't need it anymore.
Right.
And so,
Right. Right.
so we just figured we'd get, because that's really what we use it for, is just to watch things live. So we're just
Yes.
going to get the live and pay what, $14 a month,
Yeah, because
And
we
that's-
already, we have Hulu, we have Amazon Prime, we have Netflix.
Right.
and that's it. But like they have
Interesting.
different subscriptions. Like you pay a different amount if you want all the on-demand stuff. You pay a
Yes.
different amount if you want to watch it live. You pay a different amount if
Right.
you want all the catalog.
By the way, I keep getting confused on this. I know there's Now and Go. Which one is the total standalone versus the one that's the
Now.
companion? Now is the standalone.
Yeah.
And Go is the one that, like, I have DirecTV, so I authenticate Go with my DirecTV, and then that gives
Yeah.
me.
Like
And
the
then your
entire
kids do,
catalog.
and then
Right, yes, exactly.
But that's like
Right.
Go is like the entire catalog of everything that you've done.
Right.
Whereas
right.
like now it's just you can stream what's now. And
Right.
like what's live? HBO Live, is that something different?
I think HBO,
HBO
Live is
Now.
part of HBO
Is it
now.
the same thing?
It's not live, I don't think.
It's like you can get like what's live on HBO on now.
Oh, so literally what is
Oh, is that what
on
it's
the main
playing?
feed of
What's on
HBO?
right now?
Again,
like,
you know what?
could,
Like are you coming halfway into a movie if I got HBO?
I'm not sure about that.
But-
Right.
But HBO Go does it right away, like right at like you can start like a minute later.
Right.
Uh-huh, right.
Because it releases it at the same time.
That's
Right.
how we've been doing Game of
Right.
Thrones.
Yeah.
Right, right. And again, these are,
Everything's filtered through how you do Game of
I
Thrones.
give them credit. HBO, which is owned by Time Warner.
I can't keep track of this stuff
It's
anymore.
Yeah, yes, which is still CNN, yes.
Who's
I
owns
hesitated because they
what?
sold all the
Yeah.
magazines
No, I
for
know.
J.J. and Nickler.
Yeah.
In many ways, they had fallen behind. And so I like, as confusing as it is from a consumer standpoint, I like that they're trying all this stuff and realizing, and we got to stay in there because it's not, they got fat and lazy after years of being so far ahead of Showtime and Epix and Movie Channel and all those other guys. And now they realize their competition is Amazon and Netflix, and they're quickly getting lapped. So, but again, it's the difficulty of incumbency because their business has been predicated on cable operators and satellite operators being the one to deliver their product. And the product used to be just called this suite of channels that were called HBO.
Yeah.
Well, what you can see them doing is starting to challenge their cable system overlords. And I think one of the things that helps, by the way, is that they sold the Time Warner cable system. So it's not even literally in their family anymore to worry about. And you can see them seeing a cord-cutting future. And at some point, if enough people like you follow through on what you just said. And it's weird, they've had this behavior for years, going back many, many years when Sex and the City and Gary Shandling and Sopranos were on. The behavior you're describing was very, very common, that more people were lazy and just left their HBO, but didn't think about the fact that they only watched it 3 months a year when their favorite show was on. But some subset were always smart enough to go, You know, okay, Larry Sanders, 3 months, I'm paying then, and then I'm gonna disconnect. And then in 9 months, when the new season comes on, I'll call up and, you know, by then it was all addressable converters, so you just had to call, you know, the local office, and the guy didn't actually have to come out to your house again, you know. In the business, it's called churn, meaning the number of subs who drop and then resubscribe. That's actually been one of the metrics, which is why I'm interested in your product of, you know, it's funny that so many of the things we've talked about, media and not, come down to some level of retention, right? Is it meant to be a one-off product or something that you start to think of as, oh, you know, my mom liked that well enough, you know, my sister has a birthday coming up, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, it all kind of plays in on like the psychology of how people are using things.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's like a product that you're writing or putting together, and it's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we have to see. The goal is to always like keep people, right?
Right,
You want to keep people watching your show, and
Right.
you want to keep people on your product, and
Right.
On the psychological vein of what's
Yeah.
going on,
Yeah.
I'm just curious because, like, it seems like focus groups are falling by the wayside almost, and I'm just curious about what your insight is on that.
we've done focus groups. I mean,
Like, do you find them beneficial more like in certain ways than just like the 22,000 people you know that are giving you feedback on something?
Yeah, because I think sometimes when you have a focus group, for example, we had a lot of people who were like, I want a tangible product. I want to be able to hold this product, but they're not good at sort of articulating exactly what they want.
These are the feedback people?
The feedback people, exactly. And so when you sort of get a small group together and you're with them and you're watching them go through the process and you're kind of understanding better what they mean by what they're saying, because they're kind of giving you feedback like, oh, I really wish it did this. And when you really get to the heart of the matter, they're not kind of saying exactly what they want, not on purpose, they just don't really realize. So we found focus groups to be kind of successful. And it helps because, you know, you have these ideas, you're sort of part of that product. Like I've been sort of, I mean, I've only been there for a few months, but I kind of know the product and I feel it and I kind of know where there's roadblocks. But when someone kind of comes in and you watch them sort of go through that process, you really get to see, oh, actually, I kind of know it better than you do. And I had this assumption that's not true. So we found in what we're doing that they're actually pretty helpful as supplemental information.
I agree. I think that for me, applying to both the shows, whereas you would imagine it can just feel like a dagger through the heart to watch a focus group of people analyzing, you know, your hard work, right? A little less so if it's a product. It's not as hard to say, I don't like the color of that button as it is. I can't stand that writing.
Exactly.
You know?
Like we're more flexible. We haven't put our heart and soul into this yet. You know, like.
But I agree with Liz. I think that, you know, for me, ultimately, the more tools you guys can have, the better. And I agree that probably the raw data alone wouldn't be as good. The focus group alone wouldn't be as good. But the combination can be very powerful. And, you know, I say this again, not that you all should just feel that you mindlessly have to follow the data, but it's hugely useful. And I think, again, it's going to be incumbent on you to find what you can. You know, already we've talked about, let's say trends continue. And in some relatively short period of time, we're not even talking about the traditional channels, but we're really talking about the platforms increasingly, I'll make this up, but it's not a huge leap, you're doing shows that are somehow on Facebook and Apple and Google and Amazon, right? Not a huge leap of faith to imagine that. Well, right now, of course, they're all in their own ways very proprietary about their data. Okay, and that's really the business they're in, however they monetize it. Well, to the extent that they will share it with program creators, or you guys can demand it, or figure out ways to get what's useful, that's not to say you have to follow it mindlessly, but to know, even like with your users, you know, what's going on. One of the things that has always troubled me about the focus group is either the sort of pro-social bias, people saying what they think they're supposed to say, or the unintended influence of like Liz says something smart and I never thought it, but I go, yeah, I think that too. It's inevitable, right?
Psychology.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to avoid. On the other hand, you are right. There's nothing like watching somebody play with your app and seeing where they get confused, or that button isn't inviting enough, or it's not describing well enough or it doesn't do what they want it to do as opposed to what we intended to do, right? That stuff is very valuable, even though you have to take it as anecdotal, But all this stuff we've talked about, like informing, decisions you guys make as writers and as show runners, it's still going to be on you to make those decisions, but I think you're going to be better off the more data you have at hand.
Right. I used to show for Disney Channel.
Mm-hmm.
They have a focus group, 6 to 8 year olds.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
Right.
That's great.
Which on one level is terrifying, but on another level, in a way, I think is an improvement on the version before, which was 30 and 40-year-old network executives guessing what 6 to 8 year olds
Right.
wanted.
And they're going to speak the truth, those 6 and 8 year olds.
Right.
They're not going to sugarcoat anything.
Right? I mean, none of those is perfect, but again, and what we have now that we've taken for granted for years, which is Nielsen data, it's the only game in town, unfortunately, right? Except happily now through digital means, we have arguably, more useful net metrics. But you and I were talking about this earlier, it's still unclear, like, what are the really useful metrics? If we just look, let's say, at Facebook, and on my stuff, we play through this all the time. Well, is it about the pure number of video views? Is it about the number of shares? Is it about the number of likes? Is it about the number of how far into a video somebody watches? How many videos starts? Did you stay with a playlist? Did somebody make it through into 3 or 5 clips? I mean, all these things matter and they don't. And it'll be incumbent on you guys to figure out what's useful and what sort of evolves as a new kind of industry standard. But again, I would say, bless you, don't just stay with like, oh, somebody told me only to pay attention to shares.
It's already sort of hard on YouTube to like not become obsessive about analytics because like it gives you all of that data. It tells you exactly how much of the percentage of the video where there was a drop off, like, oh, everyone stopped watching here. Like
I know. And it doesn't, don't you find it becomes a little bit like Facebook likes where, you want to use it productively, but it also is like, oh, look, they liked our last episode, and like, well, how much did they like it? What did they like about it? And then you go,
so it's like, oh, that was a bad joke, I guess. People stopped watching after that.
Right,
Exactly.
right. Like, who are these people?
Right. Or like when you start to correlate it too carefully to, oh, okay, so at what point in that episode did they exit?
Somebody wrote a piece on Facebook that their mother had died, and there were like a lot of likes. Were they happy that she died?
Right.
Facebook added a new thing though. They added the different emotions, and there's
why.
still not enough emotions to actually. So it's always like the like is still like just like the basic like I
Exactly.
saw and appreciate what you're trying here.
Right. Yeah. And I've noticed already now they use a different term to summarize at least the loves, if all the.
It's reactions.
That's
I think.
it. Reactions, right?
See, but like it seems like so like I don't know, weird to like have a crying emoji when something's like legitimately sad. So
Exactly.
it's things like that. That seems so disrespectful.
Yeah.
Like
People started using the heart as like,
Yeah, that-
I love you.
yeah, that's
Like,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I
that
just love this post so much.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, people aren't using sad as much
Right.
as they are using like
Right.
the heart.
Right. But again, I would argue that's part, as frustrating as it is, I've come to appreciate, I think it's part of the genius of Facebook, is that they don't take that as failure. One of the things I think now I see more clearly that we got so precious about in television was that element of like, it's not done until we say it's done, and it's not ready to be broadcast, and we'll see it. And Facebook has that, they know it's an imperfect product, just the reaction buttons. And if you read the posts when they came out with it, they all but said so. Like they talked about, they were very transparent about the process of how they developed and why. But there are obviously a lot of smart people looking at that now. It's been around for a couple of months, and it'll continue to iterate, or it'll just go away one day. But that's the nature of a product that's already, the old model, the media model would have been, let's work and we'll pilot it and we'll test it with a small subgroup, and then one day we'll just put it out there, right? And Facebook, as you guys know, probably also when you were younger, they used to be much more in the business of not telling anybody and just putting it out there and almost looking to piss people off. Zuckerberg has described their process has been, we push and push and push, and then our users tell us when we've gone too far, right? Which again is very antithetical. Imagine a TV show that said, we're purposely gonna piss people off and then pull it back,
Yeah.
Do you think that like sort of new tech metric will like apply very well to like long form storytelling though, because like you talked about like the story of a website, like, but that's the thing that you experience every time you visit the website. So if that story changes, it's not as big of a thing. But if you have an episode that starts a story and then by like the 4th episode you're telling a different story,
Right.
I feel like that makes viewers angry because they want a consistent sort of universe to live in. And if they go back and it's always frustrating. Like I love Gilmore Girls, but going back to the beginning of Gilmore Girls and watching and being like, who is this character Mick and why does he look like Kirk? And you know, like things like that just really frustrate me.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So I'm curious to know your thoughts.
We were talking about
Yeah.
this morning,
Yeah.
sort of, and how like even we have been seeing that scripted TV could evolve, and you can speak better to what the
Yeah.
BBC is doing.
Mhm.
And I guess you guys read the article.
Right. That's why I included this week's articles about like the BBC and Netflix, which I know are very technical, but you know, that notion of now you can nearly live edit video to change stuff in progress. You know, we talked a little bit like the way Lucas has pissed people off with the whole life cycle of Star Wars, and does he have the right to go back and constantly futz with it, or do the, you know, the fans own or whatever. But I think that comes into play. You know, which would bother you more? The idea that what you just encountered, or if, what's her name, Amy Palladino, went back and fixed it all, wouldn't a part of you be going, well, wait a minute, I still want the ability to go back to the original version, even though it annoyed me.
I always like options. Like that's
Yeah,
that's always a nice
exactly.
thing. But I think just purely from a storytelling perspective, I appreciate continuity.
Right.
So like, I mean, there's small things that Lucas changed about like this original trilogy. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Put in a little bit of a music cue from
Right.
what happens so that we have that thematic
Right.
connection, or
Right.
you know, change this or that so that like, you know, like Naboo being at the end of like the Return of the Jedi, like that's not like a big deal to me because like that creates a consistency of universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe I'm just really picky about continuity.
It's also interesting, like as you were saying, who owns it? Like the power of like even in news, like who decides what the content is? Like back in the day, like there was a 6:30 evening news, and everyone sat down for it, and that was what your news was. Like you were told what the news was, and now people choose what they want their news to be, to the point where they can select what point of view they want on the news. You know, and so that's evolving, and so maybe people will try to determine the outcome of TV shows. I mean, it's a strange world.
Maybe you can add some insight into this. We have a video essay project that's due for a post-production class, and I did mine on daytime animation programs on Cartoon Network. And so just in the process of me doing research on it, like I discovered the advent of television ratings in the mid 90s. And for some reason, news, sports, and advertising aren't rated. Is there a reason for that?
They weren't.
They weren't.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest changes, I forget what year it kicked in, was that the advertising part in particular is crucial because for the longest time, you're right, Nielsen did not actually rate the commercials. So what you were left with as a network executive in deciding whether a show was succeeding or not was...
No, I mean ratings in terms of like TV-wide, TV PG.
Oh, gotcha. Not number of people watching.
No,
the
I mean,
actual,
like, parental guidelines.
yeah, gotcha.
Shit.
Gotcha. Right. Well, yeah, that's a whole
That's
other thing
different.
because that is almost entirely political,
Yeah.
right?
They were talking about they put like the FCC put together their like a task force of people that would determine what the guidelines were,
Right.
but we don't know who they are.
Well, funny enough, in a very not exactly linear way, Prince had something to do with it because Prince, I forget which album and which single it was, but it was one of Prince's singles, as I recall, that Alan Tipper-Gore's daughter was listening to, that Tipper didn't like, that led to the recording industry ratings on music.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Which
That was Frank Zappa. No.
His was years earlier. That more specific one in the late 80s, I think, was Prince, which led to the advisories on music, right? And then in a way that became a model for the advisories on television shows. And as you got, I don't know if any of you pay attention, in a weird way, you may or may not more when you have your own kids, but as you guys know, they're so detailed as to be useless, or in a weird way, be intentionally or unintentionally titillating, right? It's like, oh, this show has nudity, I'm sticking around,
Yeah.
you know, right? Sure, bad language, bring it on, you know? I mean, in a weird way, the specificity was intended, frankly, to be more useful to viewers than the movie ratings have been. You know, where, again, if you're a parent or even if you're a viewer, let's say you know you don't like overly graphic violence, well, you know, there's
Yeah, when the Americans, they do it after every segment.
yes,
Every segment,
yes,
there will be sexual
Right,
situations
right,
and language.
yes,
that
yeah.
you may
And you
know.
know, it's funny because I haven't had to be responsible for it as a producer or as a network exec in some time, and I can't remember now what it used to be, as I recall, that when it got to really specific stuff like that, I think you had to say it at the top of the show,
Yeah.
but if it didn't come till the end, you only had to do it on the adjacent slots, right?
Well-
And I don't know if people now choose to do it throughout or if they're required to do it throughout. So like, even if the graphic violence is only in one scene, I don't remember, do you know if you have to say so at every
No.
break?
When it just, I think the mandate is that it needs to be at the top of the show.
Right,
And that's
Right.
it. And the rest of
Right.
it, because when the Telecommunication Act went into effect in 1997,
mhm,
it was voluntary.
right,
They said
Right.
that you have to voluntarily
yes,
submit, like,
Right.
to these
Yep.
guidelines
Yep.
and stuff. So,
exactly.
which is odd wording. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, is it, like, do they
Right.
get fines if they don't do it if it's voluntary? Like, what does that mean?
Right.
But, yeah, it just had to be at the top of the show, and it was after, they had the special designations for, like, you know, the violence, the sex, the language.
Right.
For, things PG and up.
Okay,
So things
right,
below that, like the Y7 stuff, you
Yep.
only had to say if there was something called fantasy violence is what
Right.
they call it.
right,
So whatever the hell that means. And so for PG and up, you have to start designating for the specific types
Right.
of, you know,
sure,
whatever.
sure. And not only is it political, but it's also very practical in the sense that, or the ramifications of it, because if memory serves, it's another one of those areas where the actual distribution of programming is outstripping the regulatory framework for it. So that, for instance, as more stuff is delivered by broadband as opposed to cable, I'm not sure that right now those rules, which are promulgated by the FCC, will technically apply. Remember, we wrestled with this even when we were putting HuffPost Live up, because by then the requirements that all video programming be captioned for deaf and hard of hearing viewers, it was being phased in, it finally kicked in, and we could never get a clean ruling on whether something that was only internet delivered technically had to comply. I think in the end it did.
Yeah.
I don't know that we got to it in time, but
It has down.
It
Yeah.
does now, but
Right.
at the time we didn't have to.
right.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
just because of YouTube and that kind of stuff. Like, is there like a threshold of like viewership or like?
No, it was
Something-
really more about the technical means by which it was delivered. The FCC, if memory serves, only has, well, initially only had jurisdiction over broadcast stations.
Yeah.
Then I think it was expanded to include cable and satellite as well.
Satellite, I'm not even sure.
I'm not sure about satellite. And I don't know, well, they now do over internet, which is why all of the net neutrality rules.
Yeah, because like YouTube has a voice recognition software that it uses for most of its videos to
Right.
try. It's
Yes,
like well known to be terrible.
correct.
But
Correct.
like they've also added the option for like
Yes.
YouTubers to like individually add captions and stuff, that kind
Exactly.
of stuff.
And even at terrible, you can argue, well, good for them, whether they're doing it by choice or because they're required to.
They're trying it.
Given the amount of programming, I don't think there would be enough captioners in the world to keep up with the amount of video added every day to YouTube.
There's a big political push right now on YouTube for the content creators themselves to like
Right.
find people to caption or to caption it themselves.
Right.
Yeah, and that's
Right.
what happened when the advent of the TV
Mhm.
rating thing is that they had to hire people to watch 2,000 hours worth
Mhm.
of
Right,
programming
right.
a day.
Hey, think about just now, the sort of exponential growth of Facebook Live video just in the last couple of weeks. And imagine, like, even if there were available, there aren't enough captioners, live captioners in the world, so they're gonna have to do something algorithmically driven if they want to or are required to caption those,
Yeah.
That's
right?
interesting.
So a question from the internet?
From David. He's
Okay.
watching. He's watching. He wanted to know what the difference between imprint and moments is.
Ooh,
Good question.
I need to know my competition. I don't know moments.
I
Now,
don't know
does he
something.
mean like
Is he
Twitter
from
moments?
Moments? Is he a plant?
David, what do you mean?
Yeah,
I think he means
Answer
Twitter
us, David.
moments.
I was gonna ask, does he mean?
Oh,
Twitter moments?
sorry.
David?
Okay.
Right. If it's Twitter moments, I mean, Twitter moments, as I understand, is an attempt to
Aggregate, like.
exactly,
content.
right, aggregate content, almost a little bit more. I'm going to call it newsify Twitter. And as you guys know, Twitter, which has really stalled from a user standpoint in recent years, has first of all been trying to figure out how to just get more new users in, people who tried and it didn't stick for them, or people who have never tried Twitter. It's a little bit of an attempt to bring organization to Twitter also. So as opposed to like, especially if I'm new to Twitter and I'm trying to figure out, like if it turns out I do like Twitter as a news feed of some sort, well, do I have to do the work to start following news organizations? Do I rely on following cool people who, what do I define as news? Is it for me sports news, tech news, general news, political news, whatever? So moments, and it goes back to something Liz was saying a minute ago, that old world model of at 6:30 at night, there's a broadcast that like smart, experienced people like your uncle and his generation of broadcasters have decided what's the news, right? Well, that's largely gone. But in a weird way, Moments is, I don't know how curated it is. It could also just be about number of clicks. It may be algorithmically driven. Do you know?
I'm just like looking to see how they bill it actually, which is interesting. See the complete story come together through the best pictures, highlights, and headlines.
Right.
So from yesterday's biggest meme to tomorrow's big game,
Right.
everything you need to know.
Right. So just as a for instance, last week.
This is what David sent me just now.
So that's interesting. That's from Facebook.
Oh, Facebook moments.
Oh, like the time, Facebook trying to be time hop, reminding you that like 4 years ago on this day you
Right.
posted this picture.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, so what Imprint is trying to do is kind of like, whereas like on Twitter or on Facebook, you're sort of, it's one to many, right? So it's like one person posting what they're doing or what they're seeing out to like the world. And what Imprint is trying to do is kind of switch the paradigm and take it as like many to one. So it's like everyone coming together and celebrating one person on this platform. So it's kind of, it almost does kind of manifest itself in a similar way in that you've got all of this stuff sort of cultivated and aggregated together. But I think what Imprint is trying to do is the opposite kind of. Instead of broadcasting to the world what's going on in the moment, you're kind of like everyone is trying to come together for one person. It is maybe the best way to sort of distinguish them in what we're trying to do and how it's different. And again, it's kind of about celebrating a person instead of for now, I mean, who knows what it will evolve into, but it's kind of like celebrating that one person instead of sort of taking like a timeline necessarily. Maybe it'll evolve into that kind of a timeline of that person's life. But for now, that's kind of what we're going for, is the sort of many to one instead of one to many.
Okay, so dumb question, but for those who have been to bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, rehearsal dinners, weddings, whatever, recently, right? There's the now obligatory video.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
What tools are people using today to make those videos?
Yeah, and it's funny because people, that's another sort of thing that we're struggling with and dealing with is like what people expect versus what you're giving them, sort of. People are really used to that video. And one thing that we don't have right now is sort of like a slideshow version. So when you received your imprint, your gift, you sort of take it in at your own pace. And you decide when to go to the next message. You decide like, okay, you know what? I'm going to take the 1 minute to read this nice message, or I'm going to take the 5 minutes to read the nice message, or I really want to stay on this picture, or I want to watch this video at this length. And so right now we haven't built in sort of an automatic slideshow effect. And people are really asking for it.
Right.
And it's a matter of sort of deciding, are they asking for it because it's what they know? Are they asking for it because they really want it, and how do we deal with that?
Right.
And so those are kind of examples of things that we're trying to take as like user feedback and decide what to do with it.
I know one of the other big pushes right now is like that you're getting a lot of feedback about wanting a physical copy of that.
Yeah.
How would the video part of that manifest in a physical copy?
Yeah. So, and this is actually something that we found from user testing, which is interesting. There are apps out there where you could sort of like, there's different ways, right? We could say like, here's the link, type it into your phone while you're going through it, or a sort of cue reader kind of thing where you take a picture and it goes to that photo. At that point, you then have to decide, well, will you go into the full imprint or just that one sort of media content? So there's definitely ways to sort of, as you're going through the printed album, allow your phone to help you see the video, right? There's different ways. We found in user testing, and again, it's very, very brief, that people sort of who want the hard goods aren't necessarily going to then go to their phone to see the video. So it's kind of an interesting finding, right? Like maybe they think they want the hard goods, but because of the way this product works and evolves,
You're only getting half the picture.
exactly. So
Like comic frames.
yeah.
Set it up almost
And like
a-
it's exactly even like the question of like, what frame do you show? Do you show the first frame? Do they select the frame? What
Right.
really represents that video?
Mhm.
So
But I'm assuming also you were saying up top, the age of the recipient is going to affect likely what they want, right? Somebody may want a book, not appreciate video in that case.
exactly.
Others may just want something that, I don't know, can always play well on an iPad.
Yeah.
Others might even want to, I mean, I know the photo, the motion photo frame never really took off, but maybe for some people
Right.
it would if
Right.
you have the ability to just have a fixed, something on your bookshelf
Right. Right.
And
that when you want to
I
play
think
it.
that the like sort of motion photo frame thing like took off with a very specific audience. It's just there's not that many people in this sort of audience. Like my
Exactly.
mom has one, and like she's like very tech savvy
Uh-huh.
for someone her age, but
Right.
she's also not gonna be like someone who like is like on Tumblr, for
Right.
instance. So
Right.
so like she definitely appreciates that kind of stuff. So I think like there is a demographic for that before we switch over to a completely
Right,
internet
right.
culture.
Exactly. Exactly. Like I
So-
don't know if you guys would want a
Sorry,
hard
Mom.
copy of something like that, or if you would be fine with just a link or something on your computer.
I want the link because of
Yeah.
the video aspect, and it's easier to like look
Mhm.
through it. I think.
Right.
Yeah, and everything's kind of on your devices, whatever
Yeah.
device it is.
I don't have storage space in my apartment.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, the whole New York thing is
Right.
a different. We're like different
Right.
people anyway.
Right, right. On the other hand, I'm curious, do you guys ever worry about any sort of wireless access? Like, would you, if it were a suitable size that you could download it on your phone, would you care about the ability to play it independent of whether you have reception or Wi-Fi?
Yeah, because then you can carry it with you wherever.
That's why
and,
I asked.
And like that gives you like sort of the feeling of permanence
Right,
Right.
without necessarily needing to like, oh, and now I'm responsible for this
Right.
object
You
for the
need
rest
to
of my
plug it
life.
in. Yeah.
right.
Right.
In part, are we losing power?
Yeah.
In part I ask because I think a surprisingly under-promoted aspect of Amazon Video is the download feature. I don't know if you guys use it at all, if you're a Prime subscriber and you look, it doesn't apply to all, but a surprisingly large number of shows and movies, you actually have the ability to download and watch offline, which is great. Like almost in the way that you would think, oh, I'm going to buy a couple things on iTunes and have them when I have a cross-country flight or whatever. Netflix to date hasn't done anything about it, and just last week the head of Netflix was saying, we know that's like high on the list of consumer asks, so they're playing around. They've resisted it because he said they like the idea of being thought of as a streaming service,
Right.
but to your point about consumer feedback, they're open to it. In fact, that he would even talk about it publicly was
Right.
a new thing for them.
Yeah.
Are you guys getting any asks that seemingly are out of the blue that were not things you anticipated, or have you? Most of what's coming through, is it stuff you guys have thought about or been talking about?
Most of it is stuff that we've talked about,
Mhm.
but maybe for us it's not as much of a higher priority. I mean, something we know that we always wanted to include that people have really asked for that's interesting is the ability within the app to thank the people who gave them the gift. Like for us, we sort of built this platform as a gift. And you give it to someone, but then you realize, okay, now that that gift has been given, the person feels really overwhelmed with like kindness and happiness. It's like the feedback we've gotten from the recipients has been incredible.
Mhm.
And so they want to take that and then they want to thank everybody.
Mhm.
And they need a way to thank everybody. And
Right.
so trying to sort of figure that out to us has now become part of the app, where it
Mhm.
might not necessarily be something that you think of right off the bat as sort of something to complete the app. It
Right.
now has become, these people are so touched, and then they just kind of like are in a vacuum.
Right. So you can't sort of close that feedback loop.
Exactly.
And are mobile, are you a true app or are you a mobile browser?
Mobile browser.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you don't have to download anything. You can get
Right.
an email from someone who says contribute.
Right.
Send a photo to my mom.
Right.
And they click on the link and they can just do it right there. They don't have to download it.
And so far, do people indicate whether they like sort of being a separate thing, or do they want it to be on a platform like Facebook that they use already? Have they indicated any
We
preference about
haven't
that?
really gotten that far yet.
Mhm.
We do notice people coming from Facebook a lot,
Mhm.
though. Whatever that means, if we've sort of hit a population of people
Right.
that wants to come together.
And is that because you're buying traffic, or people are naturally promoting it in their
It's a
feeds?
combination. I mean, I think when Friendship Day is promoted on Facebook and then you
Mhm.
see an ad for imprint or you
Right.
see a posting for imprint,
Uh-huh.
you're more likely to click on that and follow through.
Right.
I mean, your product seems to almost advertise itself because it appeals to people's want to show people, well, look what someone made me, look how
Right.
awesome I am, you know what I
Right.
mean? So that
Right.
in itself, they're gonna wanna share it.
Exactly.
So it's so cyclical that it practically.
I love you. You're hired. Yes.
Right.
But yeah, no, it's true. I mean,
Yeah.
it sort of like works within the culture that we're in.
Yeah.
Like, and I think there's also sort of a shift to trying to do good in the world, instead of like touting all the things that you're doing at the
Mhm.
moment, like the pizza you're eating that
And
looks so
someone else
great.
more
Like,
than
I think there is sort of a shift that we're trying to tap into of like just spreading kindness and doing good things in the world.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with it.
Every time we started talking about this, it's just like a role of my grandmother and me like giving her this gift. It's like, oh, look at what you made.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and whatever you think of, it's incredible. Their reactions are even better. So
Right.
I'll send you guys a link, but if you make one, you'll be surprised. It really is very touching for the people who receive it.
Is it just imprint.us?
Yep.
Cool.
There you go.
I'll send it in next week's reading assignments. You'll have a link so
Yeah.
you can try it, and you'll have
And you
what,
can send me
12
all the
more-
emails
12
with
more
all the
users.
things that aren't working,
Right.
all the things that you want to change.
Yeah.
I know.
Are links live? Can you post links in it?
You can't post links in it
No
yet.
links? Okay. Is that something that's going to happen?
We're looking into that. And you can't post a YouTube video. You sort of have to.
Yeah.
That's another thing that people have asked about.
As in, they've already made a YouTube video. They want to just include that.
Well, if you have the file though, you can share
Right.
it.
Yes.
Upload
Yeah.
the video.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's I don't even know if I should know this or should tout this, but there is some program where you can just download a YouTube video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it? I don't even know.
Yeah, you guys probably know 8 of them off the top of your
Yeah.
heads, right?
So just grab it and put it in. I don't know.
Right,
No.
right. I'm sure, is that a proprietary thing that you can't immediately ingest from YouTube?
Yeah, I mean YouTube makes it very difficult to
Right.
grab their content.
Right.
So
Mhm.
yeah, and I mean there's the same thing that we deal with music, sort of,
Mhm.
like, that we dealt
Right.
with in the news. You can't just kind of take Prince's song and just put it in
Right.
as your own.
Right.
What
about if somebody, now increasingly, if people want to include video that they posted on Facebook or images that they posted on Facebook, if it's easier for them to say, go back in their feed and find it as opposed to finding it, in their photo album on their phone, can you ingest easily from Facebook, or is that,
Yep.
okay, that's easier than YouTube?
You can also
Yeah.
download all